realizing the just absolute devastation that even in America is happening with inflation, and understanding this difference that you're now talking about in a really clear fashion, that until I started researching you for this episode, I'd never heard you delineate it this way, that money is bifurcated into those two elements. You've got the money that you spend, cool, but then you've got the money that you're trying to preserve your wealth over time. When I tell people the way you should think about your house is not something that's going to go up in value over time. You should think of your house as something that you pay an insurance policy against, the upkeep, the property tax, as a way to match inflation, which is unless your area becomes disproportionately desirable, and that does happen. So like Austin went up in value because people just flooded into that area. But for the most part, what you're going to see is actually just keeping up with inflation. That
Blue Chip Crypto 3. Now, this is part 2. This is part 2 of Michael Saylor and Impact Theory audio reaction video, part 2. So buckle up, put on your seatbelt. It's time to take off. We're headed to the moon.
As the dollar is devalued, it looks like the price and the value of your house is going up, but it's really not. Now,
I think that's fair, by the way. I think that's definitely a good way to think of it.
Yeah, I think so.
That's an excellent way to think of it. People think just because their house prices is going up, right? That they could take money out of the house, or they could do this and do that, and they don't understand money and finance, and that's why financial literacy is so important. If your house value goes up, and you know that in every 10 years, the value of a dollar, actually by Rule 72, which is inflation, right? The value of a dollar is slashed in half, right? Did it really go up? Think about it. Or did it really go down essentially based on the market? Think about it. Let's continue. You can learn so much from running with people that understand the world, but let's continue.
I think my own company, when I start talking about this stuff, my employees look at me a little bit like I'm crazy, because I'm so aggressive about getting people to understand, and it'll be very interesting to have this conversation with you, that ultimately the stock market is gambling. And once you understand that people have been forced to become gamblers based on inflation, that you have to find a way to outpace inflation, otherwise you lose your money. And the really smart among us look at the capital system, look at the equities market, and they go, oh, cool, I have a really complex way that I can find arbitrage basically in these moments where if I find an area of risk that I think I understand better than the next person, I can come in, I can buy that asset, it goes up in value compared to what I can sell it for down the road, and I'm able to sell it for a bigger win than inflation. And that forces everyone to play that game, or to just have their buying power stripped away from them, which of course is what happens to the vast majority of, call it normal to undereducated. They're just going to get eaten alive because they don't have the time, energy, or intellect to figure out this relatively complicated game. Okay, so with all of that as the structure of why even the average person should care about this to a screaming degree, there's an idea that you say.
I think what he's saying, Impact Theory guy, I think what he's saying is true. But they have something called Bitcoin that actually you get to gain money every year rather than you lose money in the 10 years that you hold on to your money. Game changer. That's why Michael Saylor is pushing this so much. It's a game changer. It's not really going to happen in your lifetime, and there's X amount of them out here. Not financial advice. I'm not telling you what to do, but I know most of my savings is going into Bitcoin. Every time I get paid, I put money into Bitcoin. Every time I make a sale, I put money into Bitcoin. Because that's the only thing. When I look at my portfolio, what I had last year and what I have this year is dramatically big difference. What I had 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now, 6 years from now is dramatically different. If you go put your money in a savings account, how much do they really give you back? Probably 2 cents, 3 cents, 4 cents, depending. Even if you have $100,000, 200,000, 300,000, what are they giving you back? And they only, the FDIC only backs what, 150K. So at a point, the bank account, What's the point of a bank account if you got more than 150K? Your money is not secured. What's the point? But let's continue.
But you go by quickly that I think if people understood, it's really going to help them. So you've said, I want to see the entire world recapitalize in Bitcoin. Now, when you say recapitalize, is what you mean, hey, that part of your wealth that you want to store to maintain purchasing power over time, all of that, instead of being in real estate, instead of being in treasuries, instead of being in equities, that should move over to Bitcoin? Is that what you mean?
To the donors of Wounded Warrior Project, thank you so much.
I mean, he cannot give you financial advice, but basically that's what he's saying without saying anything. I can't give you financial advice either, but it's much better for you to keep your money and your savings inside of Bitcoin than it is inside of fiat currency, which means pound, yen, the US dollar, whatever is considered fiat currency, which is what the most of the world operates on. You're losing because the game and the metrics that they have for these things, right? In 10 years, it don't matter if you have $1 million, a couple of $1 million, $1 billion, slash that in half. Do you get it? Do you get it? So now you allow the game to beat you, the money game to beat you. That's why I don't play video games, because I figured out the best game to play is this game called life. But let's continue.
Say it. Yeah, you've articulated that quite well. Yes, build your house on a firm foundation. Don't build it on sinking sand. Don't build it on a swamp. Build it on a granite rock, on schist. And I guess if I could give the math, the risk-free rate of the dollar, if you're capitalized on US dollars and you were to say buy treasury bonds, the risk-free rate is something close to SOFR, or the standard overnight funding rate. And, you know, that ranges, but after you get paid that rate and you get taxed on it, you know, you might get paid 5%, you get to keep 3% after tax. Maybe if you're tax-free, you get 4.5%. And if you're taxed, you get 3%. So the risk-free rate of return of your capital on that dollar standard is like in the 3% range.
We'll get back to my conversation with Michael Saylor in a moment, but first, let's talk about digital security. As the CEO of a media company, I
Gotta skip that commercial.
The risk-free rate for Bitcoin, as I just described it to you, 29% over 21 years, about 30%. So the way I look at investments is when you're pitching me an investment idea.
Listen to that. Bitcoin, on average, has a return of 30%. Even your stocks doesn't return 30% annually. Even whatever job you're working at don't return 30% annually as far as in the green, in the profit, right? It doesn't. This is the best asset class that's actually alive in today's world. This asset class is so good that Grayscale, BlackRock, these all are the big boys, the hedge funds, the people that print the money, that understand the money, that knows what's going on, right? They actually just allocated people portfolio that don't really know your retirement fund, your IRA, whatever account funding you have, right? They say that now you can have 2% exposure to it. Do y'all get how significant that is? If it was up to me, I would have not financial advice, but 98% exposure to it. Why are they only giving you 2%? That's why you got to take matters in your own hand. No diss to BlackRock and no diss to Grayscale and to Art Cathy Woods and all of these ETFs and all of these things, right? If you don't own the key, it is not your coin, which means that I will much rather own the key. Yes, you can have an ETF that represents the Bitcoin. You can have MicroStrategy that represents the Bitcoin, right? But if you're not converting your profit into those actual digital assets, then you're a fool. Because now your money is still in what? Fiat currency. The point of it is to be decentralized, not centralized. Let me repeat. The point of it is to be decentralized, not centralized. That's why Bitcoin is considered a blue chip crypto. Let's continue.
I say, well, I've got a lot of money in Bitcoin and I'm expecting about 30% risk free for the next 20 years. You have to actually pitch me an idea that generates more than 30% plus the risk premium plus the tax efficiency. If you told me here's a thing that'll make me 50% a year, but it was going to be taxable, that might be 40% a year or 35% a year. And I'm like, well, after the risk, it's still not as good as my risk-free rate of 30%. So if you're capitalized on Bitcoin, if you understand it, and if you understand, and if you have a long time horizon, if you're going to hold it more than 4 years, you don't care about the volatility. All you care about is the annualized return. The annualized return.
Hold on, because there's
right?
a lot of assumptions in there. So I know a lot of people are clutching their pearls right now about Bitcoin being referred to as risk-free. So can you break down for us the difference between that volatility and then how you can have the confidence to look at this and say, no, the risk is merely a timeline question? Because I think a lot of people will take exception to that.
Yeah. So, well, the dollar is zero ARR, zero volatility. That is to say, the dollar goes up 0% against itself each year, and the dollar is zero volatility against itself each year. So, if you're on the dollar, you're living in flat land, and you're a stationary person in flat land.
Do you hear what he just said? If you have a whole bunch of dollars, millions of dollars, billions of dollars, you're living on flat land. That's why you can't get out of the rat race, because it don't matter what you build. You can build a mansion with that $1 million, but it's still considered dollars, right? Or let's just go to a broad aspect, because dollars is just a derivative of fiat currency. If you're building it on sand, it's going to sink eventually. So why build a house on sand if you know that it's going to sink? Which means that's a metaphor for saying, why build a house on the US dollar, on things that's not in your best interest as far as fiats, pounds, rubles? Why do that? It's a setup for failure. See, they say how you start is how you finish, right? And if you start building a house, I don't care if you have the most beautiful, lavish house, marble floors. It doesn't matter what it is. If you start wrong, 9 times out of 10, eventually you're going to face that problem, right? So why not build it on concrete? Why not build it on something that's reliable? I'm talking about financially, because think about it. What is a house, right? I mean, and I'm using a house just for example, because people think having a house is an asset, right? Well, to most it's a liability. This is why. If you don't pay them bills, if you don't pay your house bills, if you don't pay your mortgage, if you don't pay your property taxes, right? That's money that's coming out your pocket. So how is it making you money? Now, if you're renting it out and doing this and doing that, okay, then you have a point there, right? But it has to be making you a mass amount of money. But if you're renting it out in dollars, does it really matter? No, because the money that you collect at the end of the day, right? And yes, some of that money might be tax-free, because that's why most people have homes for write-off, tax-free things, XYZ, right? Your dollar itself, even if it's tax-free, your dollar itself is still losing. It's called purchasing power. You're still losing purchasing power, because yes, your money is tax-free, but your purchasing power actually diminished after 10 years. So voila, you're back to square one. In 20 years, you're okay. In 10 years, you're halfway there. In 20 years, it's over with. So it only takes 2 decades to wipe out everything that you have built. Sometimes it's just a one click of a button. It's an overnight transaction. It could be a tragedy. It could be anything along that nature, right? So I'm saying it all to say, why not have, and I'm a big advocate for Bitcoin, why not have something that's digital? The future is going to that regardless. The United States government will have Bitcoin as its strategic reserve. It's happening. Y'all don't see who's president? It is happening. If y'all don't see who's president, what he's pushing, y'all blind. If you don't put a bank, which means a whole bunch of money in front of this current that's about to happen, you will not be one of the richest. If you don't change your way of thinking, right? And if you don't want to learn, I challenge yourself to learn about this. Because first, most people are going to be on the fence. Then after you spend X amount of hours, you're going to say, aha, this kind of is God's money. It solves a lot of problems that we had. Aha, this is the first time in history that the Federal Reserve will be audited. Aha, they have a technology that actually could pull that procedure out. So all of this taking money from here, putting money here, money being unaccounted for, no, everything is going to be on the blockchain, which means that they're going to be able to know everything. So that's over with. Literally, it's literally over with. But let's continue.
A pedestrian in flatland. Bitcoin is going up 60% a year against the dollar. How long? Well, since MicroStrategy made its first investment 4 years ago, it's 60%. But if you stretch back 6, 8, 10 years, I think it's also 60%. So like a decade. But you can measure it back a decade and you see it's going up 60% a year. And it's 60 volatility. It's a 60 vol against the dollar. So you should think of Bitcoin as an asset. It's like you're on a speeding train going 60 miles an hour and you've got a flywheel spinning 60 RPM. And the pedestrian on flat land is standing on the plane watching the train go by, thinking this is scary. It's going to suck the oxygen out of my lungs. And they're thinking my money isn't an asset because it goes up 0% a year. So they have a different view toward money than the view of someone on the Bitcoin train. The person with $1 million of cash is going to have $1 million of cash in a decade. A person with $1 million of Bitcoin is going to double their capital every 18 months. If they just hold on to it, right? And so they're going to double it once, twice, 3, 4 times at that rate, right? The volatility
but this really
itself,
does come down to, sorry, and I'll let you get back to that.
Yeah.
But this does come down to a belief that when you look into the future, that the setup that makes it have the 60% ARR is going to continue. Because I look at this and I say the only reason that it has that kind of reward is that it is volatile, that there are question marks. Because if there were no question marks, everyone would flood in near instantly. It would hit homeostasis, and that would be that. So I think Bitcoin is anything but risk-free, but I do think that the volatility is advantageous for the people who are going to be right if people are right about the upside. That's the most fair way to say it. Why do you think the best way to conceptualize this is as risk-free?
Likes are cute, but let's be honest, cash is better. I got 50,000 followers.
Cash is not better. Let's be honest. Let's continue. Hold on, one moment. Technical difficulties, one moment.
And a lot of this started with me getting to know you, researching cryptocurrency, realizing the just absolute devastation that even in America has happened.
Build it on a granite. The risk-free rate for Bitcoin, as I just described it to you, 29% over 21 years, about 30%. So the way I look at investments is when you're pitching me an investment idea, I say, well, I've got a lot of money in Bitcoin and I'm expecting about 30% risk-free for the next 20 years. You have to actually pitch me an idea that generates more than 30% plus the risk premium, plus the tax efficiency. If you told me, here's a thing that'll make me 50% a year, but it was going to be taxable, that might be 40% a year or 35% a year. And I'm like, well, after the risk, it's still not as good as my risk-free rate of 30%. So if you're capitalized on Bitcoin, if you understand it, and if you understand And if you have a long time horizon, if you're going to hold it more than 4 years, you don't care about the volatility. All you care about is the annualized return. The annualized return.
Hold on, because there's
right?
a lot of assumptions in there. So I know a lot of people are clutching their pearls right now about Bitcoin being referred to as risk-free. So can you break down for us the difference between that volatility and then how you can have the confidence to look at this and say, no, the risk is merely a timeline question? Because I think a lot of people will take exception to that.
Yeah. So, well, the dollar is zero ARR, zero volatility. That is to say, the dollar goes up 0% against itself each year, and the dollar is zero volatility against itself each year. So, if you're on the dollar, you're living in flat land, and you're a stationary person in flat land, a pedestrian in flat land. Bitcoin is going up.
I'm going to pause this for a second and I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to do a part 3 or as many episodes as I need to so we can fully cover this. Once again, this is an educational platform. Leave your thoughts down below. Subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you think about Michael Saylor and impact theory. I give credit when credit's due. Check out the entire video. It's linked to the description. And I have to head to the gym. It's 9 a.m. So I have to head to the gym. I'll probably get back on here a little later on to do another episode, probably a late night episode. So subscribe to the channel, hit that bell notification, buckle up. It's time to take off. We're headed to the